what made the biggest difference to me as a book operator was when I realized the difference in customers. And I tell the story in the book how my uncle, Jack Franzi, Pittsburgh Jack, who was a very successful lifelong sports handicapper, better, he was upset when he realized that I was tracking the play of certain individuals. And now at the end of the month, for several months running, I could say this customer won this amount, this customer bet this amount, won this amount, lost this amount, and so forth. And now all of a sudden, the guys that were really making an impact on the sportsbook revenue in the 70s and early 80s, now all of a sudden they weren't doing it, at least in my operations, they weren't doing it anonymously anymore. And that was a game changer.
Please like, share, and subscribe. It really helps the channel, and I appreciate it. Well, what happens when the guy setting the odds has seen it all, from mob-run sports books and paper bags of cash to billion-dollar bets and today's app-driven gambling boom? This week on Talk About Las Vegas, I sit down with legendary bookmaker Art Manteris, the man who helped shape modern sports betting from the inside out. With a 40-year career running iconic sports books at the Stardust, Caesars, and the Hilton, Art shares jaw-dropping stories of gangsters, celebrities, and the high-stakes world behind the betting line. His new book, The Bookie, Inside the High-Stakes World of Sports Betting, a legendary bookmaker's tale of gangsters, celebrities, and the art of the game, written along with Matt Birkbeck, pulls back the curtain on one of Las Vegas's most fascinating industries. The book is available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, bookshop.org, and all the usual places. And you can follow Art on LinkedIn and X. And Art, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Ira. It's so nice to talk to you.
Same here. I've been following your career for a long, long time. You've been such a part of Las Vegas, and now I know you're residing in that little quaint hamlet that we all love, Boulder City.
I
But
am.
somehow you're able to stay in the game and want to stay in the game for a long, long time. You're still in the game because you're consulting as well as writing. But I guess we have to start out by, why did you decide to write the book?
Well, clearly there's some legacy issues involved. So there is a little bit of pride involved in recapping the many interesting stories over a long career. And I was fortunate enough to work in an industry that was not only exciting and fun for a young man to be a part of, but also fascinating to many people around the country. And when I tell some of these stories at gatherings in other cities and states, I find that there was a huge amount of interest in the things that we do here in Las Vegas. Some things that might be second nature or commonplace for us are very fascinated for many people elsewhere. So I thought there was a market for the book. And also, I did have an opportunity to use much of the proceeds from this book for the two charities that are very near and dear to me. So I looked at it as a win-win all the way around to do it. And on top of it, it was really fun recanting all these stories and reminiscing with some of my friends and colleagues over the years while putting the book together.
If you want to give a shout out to the two charities, go right ahead.
Sure. It's Blood Cancer United, formerly Leukemia and Lymphoma Society, and World Wildlife Fund, which are two of my favorites.
When you first started out, and I want to get back to the writing of the book in a little while, but I'm more intrigued by how you started all of this. You came in at a time when Las Vegas was supposedly transitioning from what everybody perceived as the mob run Las Vegas to more of the corporate Las Vegas.
Mm.
Howard Hughes starting that ball rolling many years ago. I came in 78, so I saw the transition at that point coming from, it was a mix, frankly, of some of the old boys and the more modern corporate structures we see today, and
Yeah.
even more corporate. So when you first came to town, what was it that struck you about the town, Las Vegas, and struck you about the industry right at that moment?
Well, I came at the same time as you. I came in late 1978, but I didn't work in the industry immediately. It was a year or so later that I started in the industry. When I first came here, I had two goals, and one was to finish school at UNLV, which I was pretty close to turning the corner and coming down the stretch on, and also I had another career opportunity that before I left Pittsburgh in the movie industry as a stuntman, and I had intended to pursue that. But once I started working in the race and sportsbook industry, everything changed. There was no looking elsewhere. There was no moving away. There was no going back to Pittsburgh. There was no going on to LA. I was going to be a Las Vegan once I got a taste of the race and sportsbook industry. Fell in love with it. Loved it. For the next 43 years.
Would it be fair to say that it was, even though you're not betting, you're actually the other side of it? Would it be fair to say it was addictive?
Yeah, it is fair to say that because I was really consumed with financial wins and losses. That no matter what else, I mean, there's certainly a lot of things that were important to me Ira, in running race and sports books, but revenue was always a big part of it. Compliance was always top concern for me, and protecting the gaming license of the companies that I represented. And then guest service was a close second in priorities. But the third, getting the money was also a big part of the business too. And I did have a pretty good run, a pretty good track record of success as far as revenue production was concerned.
Were they surprised that you had that dedication to compliance? Because everybody has that view of gambling and sports books and race books that there's just some not loosey goosey so much, but it's not necessarily as buttoned down as one thinks, but it actually is in a regulatory environment such as Nevada.
I think Nevada does a wonderful job in monitoring and regulating sports gambling. And, with almost 65 years of regulatory experience in sports in the United States, I was shocked. And I'm still shocked that all other states in the U.S. didn't more closely emulate Nevada's model of sportsbook gambling.
Was there a reason for it?
I think that everybody was the whole country was swept away in the appeal of the British bookmakers for some reason, and I did not see that coming. I thought that the Las Vegas model, which is also very similar to the offshore sports book industry model. I assumed that would be the model that would take root and flourish across the U.S., but it's not. It's European systems and liability management teams and marketing teams and so on and so forth. That's not to say that there's not a place for Las Vegas style sports book gambling. There is, and the growth and sustainability of the Nevada industry is a strong testament to that. But in some other markets, the game is surprisingly different than what we see here in Las Vegas. But one thing that comes to mind is team bet numbers. There's a lot of books across the country now. There's even some in Nevada now that don't use team betting numbers, something that we built everything around for many, many years. But the one thing that I can't let this subject go without getting into, Ira, and that's the integrity of the product, the integrity of the sports themselves. I thought in Nevada we did an incredible job of monitoring for any improprieties, and in those very, very rare circumstances where irregularities did surface, we did exactly what we were supposed to do. We uncovered it, monitored it, documented everything, had everything on video surveillance, it notified the Nevada Gaming Control Board or other regulatory agencies, and prevented those types of problems from recurring for the most part. Today, those things are popping up all over the place.
Mhm.
They didn't happen in Nevada. They didn't happen when we controlled the sports integrity, but they're happening now, and it's become really worrisome for somebody like me who considered that an important part of the business, an important part of my life's work.
Right.
Now to see it crumbling the way that it is, it's very alarming and very disappointing.
So it sounds like there may be a need for, at some point, federal regulation that would be consistent across state lines.
Unfortunately, I can't advocate federal intervention because there's been such a bad history. Bad past performance charts are extremely troublesome when it comes to sports gambling, and I'll tell you why quickly.
Sure.
In 1992, and I tell the story in the book of how PASPA came to be. The professional amateur sports pro and amateur sports protection act, professional and amateur sports protection act, which outlawed the expansion of sports gambling to other states across the country, although it did give New Jersey a 2-year window of opportunity to pursue legal sports gambling. They didn't do it, and that story's in the book also as to why that didn't happen. But nevertheless, we at the Hilton had the vision of opening sports wagering at racetracks across the country, through being within the confines of the Interstate Horse Racing Act and also the Wire Act. And so we had that vision and began making preparations and began talking to racetracks across the country. There was immediate pushback by certain factions. They lobbied the leagues. The Laurel racetrack right outside of Washington, D.C. was very, very interested. And in retrospect, that turned out to be the worst thing that could have happened. So, in any because Congress got involved quickly, and federal law preventing sports gambling expansion was the law of the land pretty quickly. The PASPA comes into being in 1991 or 92, and it was right at the onset of online commerce. And so what did the illegal bookmaking industry do? Went right offshore in the Caribbean and Central America, where licensing procedures started happening in different jurisdictions and taking all the business from the U.S. across the country. So that law, in my opinion, created the illegal offshore sportsbook gambling industry. Then fast forward to 2006, UEGA, the Unlawful Internet Gambling Enforcement Act, another major act of Congress to prevent offshore sports gambling, absolutely and unintentionally created the daily cash fantasy sportsbook industry. And immediately thereafter, the airwaves were just flooded. Not immediately, but pretty quickly thereafter, airwaves across the country were just flooded with sports fantasy advertising, including in Nevada, which was bizarre to me because that really what the product that had morphed into proposition wagering and was being offered, different jurisdictions across the country, including here in Nevada. And I, at one time, testified to that effect here in Nevada in the governor's gaming policy committee.
So I can see why, yes, you're opposed to my suggestion, which was just a suggestion, but
yeah, they're just the law that's on the book still to this day is the Wire Act of 1961, I think it was, and that it's so outdated, it's just ridiculous. It's supposed to prohibit the interstate transmission of gambling information, right, on sports gambling, which nobody knows what that means today. It was written before laptops and mobile phones, so it's just so irrelevant and so old, and yet it remains the law of the land on the books. So yeah, the federal intervention is not something I would advocate, but there are steps that states can take, and right now they've got to get their act together. Some states, which are a lot making some serious mistakes, in my opinion.
Speaking of compliance, and then I'll leave the subject, but in terms of compliance, you were scrupulous about maintaining compliance. Did you ever get from any of the sports books that you worked at any, I don't know if the word is pressure, but just some disagreement from upper management about you being a little bit too on top of compliance?
No, I would say no, but the reason being that I always thought that our books, my sports books, my company's sports books, were pretty well-oiled machines and ran pretty well. Um, Processes and policies and procedures and things just flowed as they should, and revenue was always strong, and hold percentages were strong, and so not only were we making money, we were doing it within strict compliance. If we weren't, if results were really bad, maybe things would have been differently, but they never were. I can honestly say that in my career that I had great relationships with upper management and did did things the right way, and had good success together.
When you look at the sports bettors demographic from when you started to now, has it changed at all, or is it fairly consistent? Meaning, are there a certain type, age-wise, or just certain attributes of a sports bettor from 30 years ago versus today?
Well, I always was aware of the draw of sports gambling to young people, especially young men, of course. Um, that hasn't changed, but it's kind of gotten on steroids now. It's multiplied.
Sure.
And that's another concern of mine, by the way, because I have a young son and grandchildren this age, and I've been appalled at seeing how they and their friends are drawn to sports gambling and could do it at young ages, either with parents' cooperation or other. In some cases, driving. Mentioned I live here in Boulder City. I'm right on the Arizona border. But I knew that the kids would be driving over into Arizona to play the daily cash fantasy games almost daily. Took me a while to figure it out, especially because I had a teenage son that didn't ask for any money for about a year. I said, where is he getting his money? And he was making it playing fantasy games daily.
Well, that's one way to do it, I guess. So,
Yeah,
well,
yeah, but nevertheless, to a more important point though, um, right now, so many young men are being drawn to sports gambling on their mobile phones and having it in their pockets all the time and being inundated with gambling advertising at every turn. And I do think it's too much, too fast. The expansion has been too haphazard in the U.S., and I am afraid that there's ultimately going to be pushback. Most of the world that has legalized sports wagering is pushing back, and things are going the other way with severe limitations on advertising and other restrictions. I tell people, look at Italy, where sports gambling is legal, but sports gambling in its entirety is not. Um, Germany, Netherlands, UK, Ireland, all have gone the other direction. UK, I used to emulate and think, oh, if only things were like the UK in America, wouldn't that be wonderful with bet shops all over the place. Uh, but now they're pushing. Now they're going the other way as the U.S. Rushes forward with this incredibly mass distribution of the product. Um, the relationships between the gambling industry and the leagues and teams has been shocking to me. And I'm afraid that it's unsustainable. I still love the leagues. I love the product. I love watching the games still to some degree, not as much as when I had a financial interest on them, but I still love the products. But they both should stand on their own. They're better off being separate. Um, I had when I worked for the NBA for for a decade as a consultant. I always pushed the message that there has to be a very clear separation between gambling on sports and participation in sports, and that line can't be blurred. Well, that line isn't blurred anymore. It's gone. And the leagues loved that message at that time. But once PASPA was repealed, the leagues have reverse position 180 degrees, and they have a terrible messaging problem now, in my opinion, Ira. Um, they're telling their players and their coaches and their staffs and other employees to stay away from gambling. Gambling is so evil, and stay away from it. And at the same time, signing partnership deals and sponsorship deals, and some wearing emblems of gambling companies on their logos. And that just, it's not going to sell. It's not going to age well. I don't believe. And
Yeah.
I'd rather see.
Mixed messaging there.
Yeah, exactly. And I'd rather see common sense prevail now, and the leagues, get a grip on these things now, rather than having solutions be imposed on them at a later time.
In your career and throughout the book, you talk about a lot of interesting, I'll call them characters.
Mm.
Um, if I asked you to narrow it down to the two most interesting or fascinating people that you've dealt with, either positively or negatively, who would those two be? And if it's three, that's okay too.
Um, well, first one that comes to mind, and I was just emailing him just shortly before taping today, was Roxy Roxborough. Roxy was a very prominent and prestigious odds maker and sports industry consultant, and a brilliant guy, and a good friend, and a good friend to the business. And working with him, it was enormously valuable to me. I did learn a lot from Roxy as a bookmaker and as an odds maker, and I'm forever indebted to him. So he would be definitely number one on the top of my list. Um, I, I'm thinking now that do I want to go down the negative path, or do I want to adhere to the
Well, wait a
one?
minute. If it's in the book, Art, yes, you do. Let me mention the book again. It's called The Bookie: Inside
Yeah.
the High Stakes World of Sports Betting, a legendary bookmaker's tale of gangsters, celebrities, and the art of the game.
Okay. Yeah, I would be remiss then if I didn't mention Billy Walters. Clearly the most successful sports gambler in American history, but not a friend to the sports gambling industry in my opinion, and certainly an adversary in terms of getting the money. If revenue production for the sports book was a top priority, it certainly was for certain high end gamblers as well, and that created an adversarial relationship that lasted pretty much the length of my career. But I learned a lot during those long-term battles, and became a better bookmaker because of it, I'm sure.
What was the most surprising thing that you learned about the business over the years? Was there one thing that when you started, you started learning more and more and being much more effective, but was there one thing that hit you somewhere along the line? It could be 5 years in, 10 years in, that just made a big difference to you.
Well, yeah, I would say that what made the biggest difference to me as a book operator was when I realized the difference in customers. And I tell the story in the book how my uncle, Jack Franzi, Pittsburgh Jack, who was a very successful lifelong sports handicapper, better. He was upset when he realized that I was tracking the play of certain individuals. And now at the end of the month, for several months running, I could say this customer won this amount, this customer bet this amount, won this amount, lost this amount, and so forth. And now all of a sudden, the guys that were really making an impact on sportsbook revenue in the 70s and early 80s, now all of a sudden they weren't doing it, at least in my operations, they weren't doing it anonymously anymore. And that was a game changer. Now over time, automated, computer programs and things were able to track these things and could give you answers, very, very quickly. But in those days, everything was manual, and doing everything manual turned out to be the best education possible for me in a lot of ways for bookmaking purposes as well. Tracking liability and adjusting your liability accordingly was certainly a great best education a bookmaker could have ever had. So I really fell into the industry at the exact right time to learn as much as I could just before mass expansion and just before automation. Yeah, that was a pretty good lucky streak there.
How important is it besides the technical stuff? And you learned it, as you said before, we automated a lot of things and made it much more efficient. How
Yeah.
important is customer interaction, customer service, getting to know the customer, or does that play a part?
Oh, it sure does. And it still bothers me. It bothers me a lot when I see things that don't meet the guest service standards that Las Vegas is known for, and what made Las Vegas so great for so long and so successful in the early days. Um, yeah, guest service to me encompasses a lot of things, and in today's world, greeting customers, making eye contact, wishing them well, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, we all can do that, but in today's world, technology is an important part of guest service also.
Mhm.
If the if your wagering app is not functioning properly or it's delayed, that's a huge guest service problem, and it might even be and it probably is more difficult to overcome than the face-to-face guest service challenges. Um, making sure that things run smoothly remotely, as we just described with the apps, as well as the in-service at retail location sportsbooks. I don't go to sportsbooks too often anymore, but I did have dinner in one of the hotels just a couple of days ago, and I'm not going to say where, but of course I poke my head in the sports book, look around to see how clean it is, just how they're running the book, and I saw there was a score in one of the basketball games, one of the big basketball games. Somebody hit a shot at the buzzer or something, and I see the two ticket writers behind the counter getting up and cheering and slapping each other five. And I just thought, oh my God, their customers sitting there, they have no idea who the customer sitting right in front of them may have, and oblivious to ruffling feathers like that. And it drives me nuts when I see things like that. And I'll go another step further at another strip visit not too long ago. Sue and I met some friends for dinner at a top-notch property normally, but then a quick stop in the men's room before dinner. I was horrified at what I saw. Center strip, beautiful property, and the restroom with paper towels thrown all over, and really uncleanly and embarrassing for me to show to out of towners. And that's not the kind of Las Vegas that guys like you and I remember and hope to see in the future as well.
Last question. We have about a minute. And what would you like people to take away from reading your book?
There's pros and cons. I think what they'll take away, and what I hope they take away, is that sports gambling in America is still a really fun industry. It's a fascinating world, but there are concerns now about the way things are going and the direction that sports in America is going today. There are concerns, and some of those red flags need to be addressed.
Well, that's a great way to leave it. My guest has been legendary bookmaker Art Manteris. He's author of The Bookie, Inside the High Stakes World of Sports Betting, a legendary bookmaker's tale of gangsters, celebrities, and the art of the game, written with Matt Birkbeck. And the book is available on Amazon, Barnes& Noble, Bookshop.org, and all the usual places. And you can follow Art on LinkedIn and X. And Art, thanks for being on the show.
All right, thank you. It was a great interview, and you know your stuff, obviously. I appreciated the opportunity to speak to you.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure for me as well. See you next time.